friends, how are y'all? I hope you had a great Labor Day and just a great weekend and you were able to relax from school stuff. But it is Tuesday and we are back in the math motion. So Friday in class we talked about adding integers and we also talked about absolute value. So those two should be in your mind, kind of bring those back, refresh them. So today we're going to be extending more of that prior knowledge. So we're still with that same standard. So we're still going to focus on this add. We're not on subtract yet. And we, by the end of this, I'm hoping you can add rational numbers on your own and feel comfortable with it. So let's just go ahead and get started. So yes, we're adding rational numbers. That is something you aren't too familiar with, and that's okay. Rational numbers are just fractions and decimals. So they're the scarier of the numbers, and that's okay, because I don't like fractions, but we're going to learn how to work with them. So when we add rational numbers, we use the same rules as you used for adding integers, okay? So it's the exact same process, nothing different. We just have different looking numbers, okay? So let's look at this first example, and y'all should have your guided notes out in front of you, so you should be able to follow along and write notes. -8/3 plus 5/6. Okay, well y'all know my pet peeve, I like to write it again so I can kind of have an understanding of what we're talking about. Alright, so these are my two fractions. Now, remember when we added integers, the very first thing I told y'all to do was take the absolute value of both. Now, we are going to end up taking the absolute value, but first what I want us to look at is we have different signs. We have a positive and we have a negative. We don't like that, right? So when we have different signs, remember we always subtract. Yeah, we always subtract. So we need to know which of these two have the biggest absolute value so we know what numbers we're subtracting from what, correct? Okay. Well, the absolute value of -8/3 would just be 8/3. And then the absolute value of 5/6 would be 5/6. Now, if you were in class, I'd have you kind of have a discussion of how do we know which fraction's bigger, but I'm going to help you out here. The 8/3 is bigger because 8's bigger than 3. So that means this fraction is bigger than one whole, right? Because a whole would be 3/3. So we know this one's bigger. So we are subtracting 5/6 from 8/3, correct? So I'm going to rewrite that so I know exactly what I'm talking about. Again, y'all know I like to rewrite stuff. So we're going to be looking at the green. So 8/3 minus 5/6. Easy peasy, right? Okay? Now, fractions. There's something they have to have. They have to have the same denominator or common denominator, right? They have to be the same. Well, 3 and 6, not the same. Can't do it. So we need a number that 3 and 6 both can go into. Well, 3 can go into 6 and 6 can go into 6. So we're going to use 6, okay? So I'm going to change my color. Now we are looking at the red on both the bottoms. And the operation is going to be subtraction. Now, how do we get from 3 to 6? We multiply by 2. And whatever we do to the bottom, you have to do to the top. So we would do 8 times 2, which gives us 16. Now, this remains the same, so we don't have to touch this fraction. So this would just be 5/6. So this is what we're looking at. And now we want to solve it. Okay? So 16 minus 5, because we can go straight across for that. So 16 minus 5 would give us 11. We don't touch the bottom, it stays 6. So 11/6. However, ding, 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 we got to keep that sign. So this would become -11/6. So that would be your final answer. So hopefully after walking through this, it kind of just refreshed your memory on how fractions work. Obviously, the absolute value part and taking the greater value, that's newer, but we're going to get more comfortable with it, I feel like. I know this is a lot in different colors. I'm sorry. Hopefully, you're able to follow along well. But let's go ahead and move on, and let's try some examples, okay? The first one, we have -1 3/8 plus 3/4, okay? So we have different signs, but the very first thing we do is we want to take the absolute value of both. So the absolute value of negative 1 3/8 would be 1 3/8, and the absolute value of 3/4 would be 3/4. Okay, now we have different signs. We have a negative and we have a positive. So we want to determine which sign would be bigger. Well, what number's bigger? Would you rather have $1 and some change or just 75 cents? Probably $1. So this is our biggest one. So we know we're subtracting because we have different signs, and we want to take the biggest number first because you want to take the smallest from the biggest. So 1 3/8 minus 3/4. Okay? All right, so what's our problem here? Our problem is we have a mixed number, okay? So kind of go back to that knowledge where we have to go around the world. So remember, you multiply it to the bottom, so 8 times 1 would be 8, and then you add the top. So 8 plus 3 gives us 11, and you keep it over 8. And we're subtracting 3/4. All right, so we fixed problem 1, but now we have problem 2. We have different denominators, okay? So we need a common. Our common denominator needs to be able to go in both of those numbers. In this case, it's like the one before, so we can use the 8. So we put an 8 at the bottom for both of them. Now, from 8 to 8, right, this one would stay the same. And then to get from 4 to 8, we multiply by 2. So if you do it to the bottom, you also have to do it to the top. And 3 times 2 gives us 6. So now we can just go straight across. And 11 minus 6 gives us 5. And remember, we keep the denominators. The only thing we're left to do is to add the sign. And remember, this was bigger, so we keep it negative. So it's going to equal negative 5/8. So that's our answer for that one. All right, hopefully you're feeling more comfortable with fractions. I know they're not fun and they take more work, but they work the same. You just have to know those rules, okay? So let's go ahead and do example number 2. So we have 4 plus negative 7/2. And remember, I've told you, this is a parenthesis. That's not absolute value, okay? So that's just kind of showing you that the positive and negatives don't correlate. They're not with each other, okay? All right, so we want to go ahead and take the absolute values of both signs. So the absolute value of 4 would be 4, and the absolute value of negative 7/2 would be 7/2. All right, we have different signs. We had a positive and we had a negative. So we want to know which one's bigger, correct? So we have a 4. That one's kind of easy to work with. But then we have a 7/2. It's kind of, we have to figure out how much that is, okay? Hopefully that's something you can kind of see. If not, we'll walk you through it. So remember, we want to know how many times 2 can go into 7. So 2, 4, 6. So it can go 3 times and it has 1 remainder, okay? So now, would you rather have $4 or $3.50? We'd rather have $4, right? Because that's more. So we're doing 4 minus the 7/2. Because remember, different signs we subtract. So we're taking the 7/2 away from 4. Now, 4 is a fraction. Is that a fraction or is that a whole number? Well, remember, we can always write a fraction, a whole number over 1. Okay, so we can always write a whole number over 1. So we're doing 4 over 1 minus 7 over 2. Well, we have that problem. We have different denominators. So we want the same. Well, 1 can go into anything, right? So 1 can go into 2. So we'll do 2 at the bottom for both of them. So how do we get from 1 to 2? We multiply by 2. So whatever we do to the bottom, we have to do to the top. So 4 times 2 gives us 8. So 4 over 1 becomes 8 over 2. And then 7/2 stays the same. All right, and then 8/2 minus 7/2. So we do 8 minus 7, which gives us 1. And the denominator stays the same, stays 2. We don't touch it. Now, we have to go back up here and see, was our positive or our negative a bigger value? Well, we pointed towards the 4, and that was our positive in the beginning, so it remains positive. So our answer is 1/2.